Welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Ruth Lue-Quee, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm an educational consultant, also known as My Mummy Teacher, founder of MMT Play, and I'm passionate about inclusion and play. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in the early years, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to introduce Anna Speke for our final episode together and today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Anna. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And before we get started, although I'm sure our listeners will be really familiar with you now, could you just give a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I am Education Officer at nasen. We're a charity. We're the National Association for Special Educational Needs. And as part of that role, I lead on our early years work, supporting the early years workforce in lots of different ways. I'm also a SENCO and a teacher, and have worked in various specialist and mainstream settings across the West Midlands primarily.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much. Well, this one's quite a biggie, our final and fourth episode that we're doing together. And it's focusing on overcoming challenges in collaborative teams. So what we've spoken about up to this point is, you know, the amazing things and essential things that we can do to make sure we've got a collaborative team around the child or the children. But I think it's really key to acknowledge that not always does it go plain sailing, and quite often challenges can arise for a number of different reasons. So we're going to look in more detail to address some common challenges when we're working collaboratively and how we can offer some practical strategies to our listeners to help overcome them if this is something that they're facing. So what are the sort of common challenges when we're talking about collaborative teamwork that can arise?
So I think the challenges that we hear most often are things that tie into the general challenges, things that will be very familiar to people listening, I'm sure. So things like time, capacity, resource, feeling that there's not enough or that there's an imbalance of those sometimes. I think people are desperate to do the best for the children that they're working with, but sometimes feel like there's a lot of firefighting going on potentially, and they haven't had the time to have the conversations that they need to have to be able to ensure that collaborative working, haven't had the time to reflect together, to think strategically together. So that's a challenge that often comes up. Sometimes there are differences in professional opinion, or with parents and carers, there might be differences in opinion around a child's needs. So perhaps a parent and carer is not yet ready to kind of approach the subject that there might be an additional need that their child has, or perhaps there's a need that they want addressed in a different way. So differences in opinion can certainly be a challenge that comes up. So all sorts of different things, really. I think sort of an overarching way to address some of these challenges is what you've been talking about this whole series, really, is about developing our universal inclusive practice as much as we possibly can. So if we can make sure that our everyday provision is as accessible physically, socially and emotionally as it possibly can be, then that's going to support our children, our practitioners and our parents and carers as well. So if we can kind of design curriculums, environments, resources, if we can design for that diversity and variability within our settings from the outset, then that helps to address a lot of those issues, trying to make that inclusive practice part and parcel of what we do every day. That's obviously not going to address everything, but that can really help in a lot of ways, and it can help us all to kind of feel a bit more relaxed and a bit more, you know, we should enjoy what we do. And actually, if we can get that right for our children, then we start to get it right for ourselves as well. So that could really help. And then it's about that collaborative culture and ethos in our setting. So needing to work with colleagues and with families to kind of think creatively, about ways that we can observe, ways that we can reflect, ways that we can step back sometimes and give ourselves the time to do that. How we can work together as much as possible to really get to know what our children are communicating to us as well.
Yeah, amazing. I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. Like the provision that we put that's essential for our children with special needs is actually beneficial for all our children. So if we can have these things in place, these reasonable adjustments, things like our visual timelines, things like ensuring that they can access the provision, that it's at the right height, that the tables and chairs are appropriate, that there's a space and that children have got opportunities if they're feeling dysregulated, that there's perhaps sensory tools available. If these things are just part of your inclusive provision, then that's a really great way of providing it because it's there anyway, and everyone, it's within our environment, isn't it? One of the points that you picked up, that you mentioned there, that I think can be a really common challenge, and one that is particularly challenging, is when perhaps as a professional you feel that a child needs a particular referral to a certain agency, or they need more support than you can, you're really feeling like there's something further that this child needs here, and the parents perhaps not on board, they've got that difference in opinion. Where do early years professionals stand with that? What can they do? What can't they do? Do they just have to accept that the parent got a differing opinion?
I think that goes back to a lot of what we talked about in the episode we did on parents and carers, in that if we're able to build those supportive two-way relationships with parents and carers, we're going to be more likely to be able to have those conversations for a start. We are more than likely, we will come across parents and carers at some point who maybe aren't quite ready to accept that there might be an additional need. And we have to respect that. We have to understand where they're coming from. We have to respect that difference of response, of kind of reaction. But if we can start that process supportively in early years to help them through what is potentially a really tricky experience because of expectations they might have had of parenthood, because of all sorts of other things that might be happening, we may not get to exactly where we personally think we want to get to, but actually if we can start those small stepping stones of conversation in a supportive, in a positive way, we're setting up that stall for them throughout education and beyond. So what we don't want is for it to be adversarial, because that's going to set them and their child up for a future of thinking this is going to be about us butting heads. Actually, we want to support them as supportively as we possibly can. Ultimately, they are parents and carers of the child that we're talking about. So how can we support them in those small steps as much as possible?
Yeah, amazing. And how can settings within the UK, I mean, worldwide, but we're obviously focusing within the UK today, encourage teamwork and create a supportive environment within their setting for both the staff and the children?
So I think it's about relationships and it's about communication, as everything pretty much in education and society is, really, isn't it? So I think encouraging dialogue by creating that safe space and that safe environment for all parties to express their perspectives. I think reframing around common goals. So again, providing a reminder that we are all there for the benefit of our children and families, so that we can then encourage that more solution-focused thinking. So allowing that mind mapping together, that sort of, there's no bad ideas, being able to let everybody share their thoughts and opinions, genuinely listening to try to understand other people's point of view. I think ground rules are useful in that, to kind of identify as well underlying causes or root issues. So I think within settings, sometimes challenges will come up because people feel that there's a workload imbalance, whether that is accurate or not. It might be a feeling or a perspective that they have, whether there are unmet needs within the staff team, differing values, differing context, for example. So encouraging all those skills we talked about when we talked about parents and carers. So empathy, respect, seeing other people's perspective, that emotional awareness, that really is important in that open communication, building that ethos in our settings. And following up on resolutions as well. So having check-ins, seeing where people are, building those relationships, and checking in to see how things are going, that sort of continuous improvement cycle. A good kind of way to give structure to some of that thinking can be to look at our setting as a whole, and potentially do a little bit of self-reflecting, self-evaluation of our setting provision. So, for example, at nasen, there's an early years SEND review guide that we have freely available on our website that just helps to give a little bit of perspective to that thinking and a bit of structure to that thinking, to think about how things are going and how we know how it's going, just to try and remove some of the potentially more personal, emotional-based feelings that might be in it. So that can be a useful starting point to kind of try and take a step back and see things as we should do to support all the children, rather than kind of getting involved in big emotional discussions.
Yeah, I think that's really key, isn't it? Because, Emma, when we're coming from a place of emotion, which when you're working with these children, 100% you will be, as will the parent, it can, you quite often just need to be able to take a step back to then look at it in a different light as well. And I think it's really important to just always come back to your why. Why are you doing this? What, as a team, as staff, why are we here? Why is this our job? Why did we choose to go into this? Despite all of the things that we say and talk about in education right now, we're still here. We're doing this job because of our love of the children, because that's our why, because we want these children to thrive. So really coming back to that and recentering yourself, because you can quite often get torn by all the the politics and the this and the that, but just having that opportunity to come back to them and prioritize well-being too, acknowledging that it's not easy, because there's nothing worse than somebody who's not in an early year setting expecting you to do X, Y, Z, telling you should be doing this, and who doesn't actually acknowledge what it is like day in, day out, the culture within schools, within settings at the moment for various different reasons. So I think as a leader, if you're listening to this, then to encourage teamwork with your staff, that is one of the biggest things, to acknowledge it, to say, I understand, I see you, I hear you, but our why is we're doing it for the children, and we've got to do this to meet their needs, and that's really, really crucial. So I've sort of briefly touched upon the role of managers and SENCOs in promoting collaboration. I think they've got a really important role to do in facilitating training as well, because we need to make sure that our practitioners, childminders, whatever it is, on the ground are able to access appropriate training and CPD, especially as things evolve and things change. And we want them to be tapping into the latest research, into the latest strategies that are proving effective for our children. And they also need to be able to lead and provide that leadership in resolving issues that will come up and challenges. So what do you think their role is in particular, as opposed to the role of a practitioner, so a manager or a SENCO?
Yeah, so I think it's about that ethos, that shared vision that we filter down from leadership through our setting. I think a big part of that is giving practitioners the confidence to know that it's fine to experiment, it's fine to try new things, it's fine to explore. Having that confidence is really empowering as a practitioner, I think. So knowing that if I've seen something that I think might work for this child, I can give it a try. And if somebody from leadership walks into my room, I'm not going to be judged for it. It's going to be celebrated that I'm trying something new. Not everything is going to work, but actually being empowered to be able to have a go, I think, is a really big thing. And I think collaboration between leadership and our staff. So asking for, it's the same as co-production with parents and carers, making sure that we are all involved as a team in developing our provision. So asking people, so for example, with training needs, what do people feel that they need? Have we got a structured CPD program in place? Have we asked people what they need? Have we got really clear aspirations and a clear vision? Have we got policies that are inclusive, that are welcoming, that are engaging? Does everybody understand their responsibilities? Has the SENCO got a voice on that leadership team, which they should have, but isn't always the case? Are we supporting those partnerships as well with other settings potentially, and with childminders, with PVI, so to support transitions for children and to support staff working together as well? That helps to develop our provision, but also those transition processes. And then also, have we got kind of that leadership level? Have we got owners or governors or trustees, or depending on our context, who are informed, who are knowledgeable, so that they can supportively challenge us as settings as well and hold us supportively accountable for what's happening? So it has to come from everywhere, and it's really an ethos that needs to be baked through our whole setting. Education's an all-encompassing job, isn't it? We eat, sleep, breathe it. We're also not always great at looking after ourselves because we're so busy looking after other people. And so supporting that as much as possible as well. Leadership teams showing, modelling, and making it really clear that actually we want our staff to look after themselves so that they can look after children in the best way that they possibly can.
It's essentially leading by example. If you're a leader, you need to lead by example exactly how you want your team to be able to act as well. And that's the key, really, I think, that underpins it all. And then when we get disagreements or differences in opinions between team members, so this could be quite challenging, especially, you might have a reception class or a nursery class where you've got like 2 form entry, and perhaps it's sort of a free flow setting. So they're going to be, within each other. They might have different opinions. This can be quite challenging to manage. What are your top tips, your best strategies as a leader to manage that? If you've got 2 professionals with differing opinions that aren't getting on, what would you do?
Yeah, so as we said before, I think it's about reframing, coming back to that, your why, so the reason why we are all here to start off with, and building a conversation from there. So setting some ground rules for a conversation where opinions can be shared and reasons for those perspectives and opinions can be shared, whether that is together ideally or individually, depending on what it is and how sensitive it is, obviously. So having kind of those ground rules of that conversation, underlying, identifying rather any sort of underlying causes or root issues, why that might be, if there's a perception of something happening or if something really is happening. As we said, encouraging that sort of empathy, mediation techniques if needed, with that real focus on problem solving in the interests of the child. And that's what it always has to come back to, of what is in the best interests of this child or these children and their families. So really keeping focused on that as a goal. That's what we're all aiming for. That's what we're all there for, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing. I think that's a really nice point to end our episode on. It's coming back to your why, coming back to that child-centered approach. That is what we're all there for. That is what our goal is. And we want to move forward in the best way as professionals to support these children or this child within our care. Thank you ever so much for joining me. You've been a brilliant guest and have been able to provide so much value that I know our listeners are going to absolutely love listening to.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Anna, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Ruth Lue-Quee, and Anna Speke. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.